This episode is brought to you by AMC and AMC Plus, presenting the critically acclaimed Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, praised as one of TV's best shows of the decade by the Chicago Tribune, starring Jacob Anderson, Sam Reed, and Delaney Hales. For your Emmy consideration in all categories, go to amcnfyc.com for more.
And as soon as I said the words hormone monster, Nick said,
"Touch yourself, Andrew."
And I was like, yes, that's the guy, that's the voice, that's what he said, and I did.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Hollywood Stories, where the people who made this business come to share their tales of moments great and infamous in the thrilling adventure of entertainment. In this season, we're going to look back on some tales of television, stories of those who were part of some of the legendary moments of the little screen, telling us just what happened. So to kick this season off, we don't usually focus on contemporary stories. Most of our adventures come from at least a beat or two back in the annals of Hollywood history. But this episode is about a show that is still on the air, which has occupied such a unique place in entertainment that I just wanted to look at how did this thing happen. For most of the last decade, comedy has seemed all but a dead letter in Hollywood. In particular, bawdy R-rated comedy has been all but wiped off the map, and in very particular, bawdy R-rated comedy involving young people, what were called coming-of-age comedies in my day, have been effectively erased from the landscape. This has been a terrible loss because not only is comedy half of the entertainment spectrum, but it's very often the thing that ties us to the notion of filmed entertainment. Comedies are what we quote, they're what we watch over and over, and comedy manages to get at the awkward and uncomfortable things in life that drama has a difficult time doing. In particular, bawdy, risqué comedy has been our lens to understanding those difficult passages in life's rich pageant. For young people, comedy has been a lens through which they wrap their minds around parts of the experience of growing up that their brains are still figuring out how to process. For 8 seasons now, airing on Netflix, Big Mouth has been a lone voice probing the adventures of adolescence, taking viewers on an animated journey through the lives of a group of tweens becoming teens as they run head-on to the train wreck of puberty. As we discussed, this show found a brilliant device of embodying the various emotions, terrors, and yearnings that haunt young people in various creatures and demons who form a chorus around each child. Portraying these demons from each child's resident hormone monster who urges them on to the depths of iniquity, to the ubiquitous depression kitty lurking over their shoulder when things go bad, to the ghost of composer Duke Ellington who advises one character, has been a galaxy of guest stars perhaps unequaled by any show currently on TV. From Jordan Peele and Maya Rudolph to Ali Wong, Judd Hirsch, John Oliver, Cynthia Erivo, Megan Thee Stallion, Hugh Jackman, Steve Buscemi, and Lin-Manuel Miranda have been just a few of the many stars who have passed through the Big Mouth corridors. The show deals with real issues that adolescents face today, from menstruation to the omnipresence of pornography, but it does so in a way that is hilarious and totally original, making it my candidate for the funniest show of the past decade, too. Today, we'll talk to the creators of this show, comedians Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg, whose real-life childhood friendship is portrayed on the screen. Nick voices his own character, while Andrew is played by the comedian John Mulaney. And bringing their story to the screen, who we spoke to in another conversation, was very much the inspiration of their partners in this journey, veteran TV writers Jennifer Flackett and Mark Levin, whose past credits include films such as The Atom Project and Journey to the Center of the Earth. I spoke to each pair on separate occasions from the Big Mouth offices where they were preparing for the release of the show's 8th and final hilarious season. Let's hear what they had to say. Tell me about your childhood. What was it like and what made you think this should be a show?
Well, truthfully, it was with Andrew and Mark and Jen came to me. Andrew and I have been like best friends since we met when we were 6, lifelong, dear friends.
Do you remember the first meeting?
I'm trying to remember if I remember. I mean,
It was first grade.
We were in first grade.
I definitely don't.
I don't remember like our first meeting because I think we were 6 and I was new to the school.
Yeah.
But we always liked each other. But I think there was a
It's
moment.
like around 4th or 5th grade, we really became like very inseparable.
Yes, it really it was like it became very clear that like we had a shared friendship and a shared sense of humor, and we really began to form each other's sense of humor and sensibility. Really, I think around like 5th grade is when we really kind of. So by the time we were in 6th, 7th grade, where the show starts to take place, we had very much solidified that we were best friends, that we were inseparable, and that we were like started to kind of make things together, like hosting like talent shows as like Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World, or
Which might not sound like a big deal, but back then
Who was Wayne and who was Garth?
I was Wayne.
I was Garth.
Yes.
I'm Garth.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting is over time, you're like, what's interesting about collaboration is it actually turns out in times that I am in fact Garth. To your Wayne, if you're looking at like how things are actually made at times, it's a weird partnership.
It's not a binary thing.
Exactly. It's not always broken up into Wayne and Garth as culture would have you believe.
Most relationships can be divided into Wayne or Garth.
Yes.
How would you describe the feeling of your childhood of that time? Like, did you feel like it was this nightmarish world haunted by these demons and creatures? Did you have that sense of it at the time? Or?
What do you think, Andrew?
I mean, it's so interesting because, like, on Big Mouth, like, the ultimate, like, we kind of learned pretty quickly that the ultimate litmus test is does it feel real? Yeah. Like, it's not did it happen, it's does it feel real? And, like, yeah, to me, it felt like we had all these creatures inside us, and it all felt very confusing. And I don't think, like, neither of us had, like, a particularly traumatic childhood. It's just, I think it's hard being a kid.
Well, I think that when Mark and Jen and Andrew came to me with the idea for the show, what immediately popped was it's about you guys, Nick and Andrew, and about going through puberty. And while we were best friends, we were having diametrically opposed experiences inside of puberty, and that Andrew developed very young and was immediately plagued by these hormone monsters and things like that I developed very late. And so I was having the opposite experience where I was having none of those experiences. But I was witnessing them. And so both of our experiences were slightly traumatic and complicated to go through. And yet we maintained this dear friendship through that while having very, very oppositional experiences. And I think that made me be like, oh, well, that immediately gives you a sense of a way in to the show. These two boys who are best friends who are having very different experiences inside of it.
And as close as we were, we never really talked about it growing up.
No.
Which isn't weird. I mean, I think most kids don't have those conversations, but like, as adults making the show, like, I really learned a lot about your experience growing up, and I think you learned a lot about my experience growing up that we hadn't necessarily shared when we were
it wasn't like we were having sleepovers and Andrew was like, hey, are you like chronically masturbating? And I was like, hey, are you constantly insecure that your penis is small because you haven't had puberty yet? We were not having that direct of a conversation. So it was kind of cathartic as an adult to go back and have those kinds of conversations.
That's how we greet each other.
Yeah.
So one of my obsessions as a writer is the death of comedy in Hollywood, and particularly the death of sort of profane, bawdy, outrageous comedy, which doesn't exist anymore and has been eradicated from Hollywood, except for you guys.
Well, I mean, we're happy to carry the torch, I guess.
So I want to hear the story of, first of all, how you came into all this. What were you all doing before you got the call about Big Mouth? You've been veteran producers and writers. What were you working on?
Go on.
Well, ironically, we were not working on anything. We had taken a year off with our kids and taken a trip around the world. And we were largely we had done television and we had done film, but when we had closed up everything, we had mostly done movies, and we had decided when we were on this trip, we weren't going to write anything. And as we were coming home, about a few months, we were actually in Copenhagen, and we heard, movies, it's TV now. Netflix had really just started making their original.
This is back in 2013.
2013, they had just started, and everyone was like, There's excitement in television now, and you've got to go back to television. And we were like, okay. And we had an assistant named Andrew Goldberg from many years ago who we had stayed friends with. And Andrew is one of the creators now of Big Mouth. But at that point, he was just a good friend of ours. But we had an idea for a TV show, and we said to him, you know, we're looking for the new Andrew Goldberg, like a young guy who would like to work on this with us. And he was like, what about the old Andrew Goldberg? I would like to do that with you. And that show didn't go, but we loved working together so much. And so we wanted to find something else. And you want to take over from there?
Yeah, well, our old friend Andrew and we had been working on stuff, and we thought, what are we going to do next? And Andrew had been working at Family Guy, and we started talking about, well, is there an animated show we could do? We had never done animation before. And Andrew started talking about a project he was thinking of called Bar Mitzvah Boys, he was calling it. And this was about 5 guys at a Jewish day school, because he had gone to a Jewish day school. And we thought, oh, God, you know, this doesn't really grab us, this particular thing.
Well, that's very sweet.
yeah.
Because really, when Andrew left, I turned to Mark and I said, I am never doing that show.
What was it about it that was?
I mean, I think it was that it was largely guys. It was really 5 guys. I think that's probably the thing. I was like, 5 guys, not for me, right?
So we then, like, right around that time, we ran into Nick. We had met Nick once before through Andrew. They had grown up together. And we met him, ran into him, and he said, hey, family traveling around the world, where are you going next? And we said, oh, we're going to Mexico City, actually, at Christmas time. He said, that's so crazy. I'm going to be in Mexico City at Christmas. So we didn't know Nick well, but we decided to have dinner when we were all in Mexico City. And it turned out that he was there alone, and he thought he was going to maybe hang out with young people and have a great time. But he ended up being rather lonely and ended up hanging out with us and our kids for 4 or 5 days.
Oh, it was so sweet. He called us and he was like, what are you guys doing today? And we're like, oh, we're taking a day trip to, you know, to these ruins. And he was like, can I come too? And so it's that weird thing when you're traveling with someone and suddenly it's like they're your family. And now, from not spending any time together, we spent like 3 full days together. And Mark said to me at the end of it, he said, you know, that Bar Mitzvah Boys, he was like, what if we did just Nick and Andrew and we added girls and we put them in a regular school?
And we made it all about puberty.
Which was always a time of life that has always interested us a lot. Mark did The Wonder Years. We did this other movie called Little Manhattan, which was about 10-year-olds falling in love. So there's something about that
And
age.
what interests you about it? Why?
Well, you know, that time of life, you're just waking up in the world, and you get imprinted in a really visceral way. It's just such a formative time in life.
And your feelings are so big. And I think because of that, we all remember that time in a very, very specific way, which I don't remember being 17 in the same way that I remember being 13.
Yeah.
And I don't remember like my early time in high school or even at the end of elementary school the way I remember. In our case, in the old days, it was called junior high. Now it's called middle school. But I remember those years, and I don't remember them that happily. But it gives so much fodder.
The capacity to be mortified and just humiliated when you're 12 or 13 is so much greater than it will be at any other time.
At any other age.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of feel like, oh, there's so much there. And we said this to Andrew, and Andrew was like, yes, that sounds great. And then we went to Nick and said, would you like to do this with us? And he said yes. And it was amazing. I mean, it really was. At that time, we had children. Our kids were 13 and
They were actually
16, right? Or 12 and 15.
They were 12 and 15 at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were kind of right in the thick of it. So I remember that, what was it that Andrew said about, oh, it would be so great if we could use animation, because we knew it was going to be animated, to like talk about, oh no, you said it to Andrew
I said,
about.
like, I would love to take advantage of animation to really kind of dramatize the pain of puberty and adolescence. And Andrew was like, well, maybe you mean like a hormone monster? And I'm like, yes, a hormone monster. And as soon as he said this to Nick, he said, like, we're thinking about a hormone monster. And then he said, "You mean like touch yourself, Andrew?" And
I mean, the voice was right there.
the voice
from the
came
very
out-
beginning.
Yeah, right.
And I think really in that moment, it was, I think there really was a moment right there, which was like, oh, this is so potent. This is like so alive, right?
So did that begin the idea of anthropomorphizing all these different emotions and terrors?
Well, the funny thing was, I remember that we knew from the beginning we were going to show a penis in the first episode. And Andrew said, well, does that mean we have to show a vagina too? And the boys were a little like, I don't know. And I was like, well, we must. Of course, we must. But we had no hormone monstrous at that time. And we hadn't really even talked about it. And then when for the second episode where Jessie gets her period, it was immediately clear to us, oh, well, we can't use Maury for Jessie. We need a hormone monstrous. And whereas Maury came fully formed immediately, the voice came immediately, the drawing came immediately, we understood it immediately. The hormone monstrous was harder. And it took us a while to find her design, and it took us a while to find her voice.
Yeah.
And of course we had Maya Rudolph.
Well, Maya was originally cast just to play the role of Nick's mom.
Oh, really?
And we hadn't had the hormone monstrous yet. So, but she was such an amazing resource, and she was there. And we thought, well, who would be better for this role? As we were in the writer's room, and we asked her if she wanted to do that as well. And then seeing her bring Connie to life in the booth that first time, playing with her and finding that voice, which is like got some Diana Ross in there. It's got, it's so unique, and Maya made it her own so completely.
What did you think that Connie needed to be? What was the brief on?
I'm not even sure we knew what the brief was as much as we knew she had to be fabulous. Jessie Klein, in the first season, a lot of our actors would come into the writer's room with us, which was really exciting. And so Jessie came in, and I remember she's the one who pitched. Jessie has a baseball mitt on her dresser, and Connie goes, "Get rid." And in that "get rid" was really like, it was the same as "touch yourself, Andrew," in a way. It was really like, oh yeah, she tells it how it is. And in a way, I mean, they're both such good friends to their people, to their Andrews and their Jessies and to all their kids. But I've always felt that Jessie and Connie, that's a real love story between those two,
It truly is. So was it immediately clear just sort of how far you were going to be pushing things, and how, or did that
it's funny
sort of...
because what we did is when we sold the show, we made a pencil test, which was just a little 2-minute piece of animation that showed what the show might be, and that's what we used to share it with potential buyers. And a few people wanted to buy it, and we really were right to end up at Netflix at the right time. And they gave us the opportunity because there was no standards and practices, and they gave so much creative freedom that it allowed us to really embrace our ids and to go as far as we wanted to go.
Yes, we embraced our hormone monsters and monstresses.
But when you were pitching it and you were explaining to people, you were pitching it at a moment when comedy was dead. Whatever the cancel culture was, this was sort of the height of it.
Well, this is before that. Thinking what you're referring to, but this was in 2015. And I don't remember the specific state of comedy in that time, but I do know that there were places where, like, Fox is a great home of adult animation, and they do some edgy stuff there, but they wouldn't have been able to program or allow us to do the kind of show that we wanted.
It would have been a different show. Right? It just would have simply been a different show. It would have had a lot more euphemisms. It just would have all been very, very different. I remember like the first time when it was like we needed to show blood on the underwear for Jessie. We just never thought twice about it here. And who knows if that would have flown at that time on a network.
It was such a great time to be at Netflix and have the creative freedom. I mean, they really, at that time, they wanted to lean into risk, and they really wanted to give creators the opportunity to do the thing that they wanted to do.
And they never had any doubts about,
no, they didn't. They never did.
They had maybe 2-3 notes on the first season. And because we were so unused to getting notes, we even were like, no, and then we would push back hard. And then you'd be like, you know what? Maybe they're right. You know? and at that point also, they only gave notes if they felt they were really, really important.
Did you have in your mind that this cast of the supporting characters, the Coach Steve and Lola, and were these all people that you and Jay and?
Well, we knew that we had stuff that we were going to start with Nick and Andrew based on us, and then we had characters that were going to be loosely based on kids we grew up with. We had a mutual best friend who's a girl based on our friend Liz Gould.
And very early on, we had the idea of using Jessie Klein, who you had known forever, and I had known more as a writer, but just like having heard her speak, she had that vibe to her. And I think over the years, the character, especially the first couple of years when Jessie would come to the writer's room, the character just became very, very Jessie Klein.
Yes.
Yeah.
She had a very specific way of speaking. She somehow was like smarter and funnier than the boys, but also kind of like one of them. And Jessie infused her voice into that character, and so it became something more than just based on our friend. And then Jay is loosely based on a couple of friends of ours who, an amalgam of different influences, one of whom fucked his pillow.
The other of whom is a magician, which is even more shameful. But also,
what an inspiration to put those two things together.
Yes.
A magician who fucks his pillow.
Yeah. Well, alone, just one of them would have made them too unlikable. But you bring them together and it makes it workable.
Well, and also, like, again, like Jason Mantzoukas, like, brought so much of himself to that character. Like, in the first season, I remember coming in being like, how is anybody going to like this kid that's fucking his pillows and doing tons of magic? And Jason came in and was like, Jay is always the third wheel.
Yes.
Like with his brothers, with Nick and Andrew, he's the third wheel, and he just wants to be part of something. He wants to fit in. And like he found that humanity to the character.
That's what's so brilliant about Jason and all, frankly, all of the voice performers we brought in, almost all of them are writers in their own right. And Jason particularly is known for playing these outlandish, dirty, vulgar characters, but like he always finds an emotionally honest way into them and a backstory that explains how and why the character's so demented.
Yeah, there's really no villains in the show throughout. There's a sort of a sweetness to every.
I think of Nick as the villain.
I do too at times. I mean, what's interesting even in the course of the show is a villain that was developed in the show was the Shame Wizard, who was voiced again by David Thewlis. We were writing that as we were watching Fargo season 3, and he's the villain in that season. We were writing it to him. We never thought we would get him, and then our casting director Julie Ashton was like, "Guys, David Thewlis." We were ready to move on, and then she was like, "David Thewlis is actually in and interested," and we were like, "Okay." Does he know what he's doing?
Did you warn him like you've got to understand about the show?
Yeah, but
then we met him, and like right away you found like you have something that you say to sometimes about like somebody that we don't know. You're like, he's one of us.
Yes.
And like as soon as we met David, it was like, oh, he's one of us.
Always one of the busiest actors we work with, but almost nobody more, if they could be available to do table reads, to do more records. He loved the show, and he's a guy with shame. Obviously, it's shame, and it was a true villain, a true haunting figure that plagues Andrew and eventually all the other characters in season 2 of Big Mouth, which really opened up what the show could be on a lot of levels of like, oh, these emotions or feelings that could come in and really become thematic tie-throughs for an entire season. Similarly, we did with anxiety and love and hate and other elements of the show, depression. But it really started with shame. But even by the end of season 8 of Big Mouth and Human Resources, you then understand
the humanity of the Shame
find the
Wizard,
humanity of the Shame Wizard is that he's got a mother who's made him feel ashamed for his originally, by the way, voiced by Helen Mirren. So everybody's got a story, as that's how they've become who they are, including the Shame Wizard. And so it does mean that you eventually make no villains because there's a backstory to understand how everybody got where they are.
I want to talk about some of the supporting characters and how they came about. I mean, it's such a incredible full ensemble there. Let's start with Coach Steve there.
Oh, well, there's a real Coach Steve. so much of especially the first season, but the whole show was born out of Nick and Andrew. And they had a coach who they loved and who was also quite a character. And so he was there from the very, very beginning. He was in the pencil test.
The little pencil test we used to share. Duke Ellington was in the pencil test. Coach Steve was in the pencil test. Other characters?
Missy might be my favorite character in the whole show. How did Missy evolve?
Well, so Nick had worked with Jenny Slate for, they had done publicity together, and she had really been on the Kroll show, and she had a voice that we really loved and we really wanted for Missy. So that was sort of how Missy was born. And initially she had, she was a mixed race, and she was just innocence and excitement and all those things. And like kind of a lovely nerd that Andrew could be in love with.
A horny, spazzy nerd.
Exactly.
Which is what a lot of the writers seem to have been.
Yeah.
And so everybody's heart could really easily go to Missy.
She's the one after you watch an episode, you find yourself talking in Missy voice.
Yes.
It's
Oh, yes. And a lot of Coach Steve voices and Maury voices, I'm sure, Connie. But there are some pretty iconic voices. I mean, Nick has done, we counted the other day, I think 78 different voices for the show.
78,
Nick,
maybe even 79.
Wow. Yeah, he did obviously the Hormone Monster, Nick himself, Coach Steve. He does Lola very famously. Does Lola?
We'll talk about Lola.
Rick,
you can't go through all 78.
No, but I mean, just an amazing, iconic list.
Does he have a lot of scenes where he's
four
different characters talking?
And I can show you, I can show you a clip of him in the booth doing Nick, Maury, and Sylvester Stallone from the first season, and they're all in conversation with themselves, and the timing is perfect. It seems as if they're overlapping with each other, even though he's alone in the booth doing it.
And what is it like when he and John Mulvaney get into all these and start?
Well, John and Nick, they went to college together. They've been best friends forever, and to capture that kind of chemistry in Best Friends in the Show was really kind of extraordinary. They're both such gifted improvers, so they would enrich, just with whether it's the timing or a tweak to a line or a whole new tangent. It's pretty magical.
We were very lucky in our final episode. We got them back into the booth together, and it was really like old times.
At first, especially, was the real Andrew giving John a lot of notes about how Andrew should.
No, Andrew's really wonderful about this is him and it's not him, and he felt so. I mean, to have John to be your voice, he was so happy. John always pluses everything. He was very, very happy.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about Lola then. How did Lola come together?
We had Devin, who was our kind of the queen bee, and we had her tough lieutenant, who was Lola. I will really say we did not realize just what Lola would become. Like, that's really one of the exciting things.
Lola really emerged as one of the major characters of the show, really just through the force of her
fabulousness.
Yeah.
And then there's Jay is incredible.
Yes. It's really letting Jason be so big and Jason, and it's so exciting to watch.
It's just like constantly the saddest, most horrifying life, but his optimism and enthusiasm never.
Yeah, he remains positive and hopeful unrelentingly in the face of just an absolute horror show of a life,
Is there a favorite cameo or guest appearance?
It was very special when Hugh Jackman played his own penis, or actually, maybe it wasn't his own penis. I should say the Hugh Jackman penis.
How did you present to him that we've got this part you think would be good for?
Nick has got amazing reach because he's so well respected in the comedy world, and
But also we had Tandaway.
Tandaway Newton actually is plays Mona on the show.
And
she had just done a movie with Hugh Jackman, and she said, you are getting Hugh to do, because she'd seen the script, the Hugh Jackman penis. And we said, well, actually, we thought maybe we would just have someone do the voice. She said, no, you must ask Hugh. I'll ask him for you. And then that one, Tandaway Newton texted Hugh and said, I have a very funny idea for you to do this. And he said yes. And it was during
COVID.
During COVID. And Hugh, we sent him the sides. He was going to record it himself.
Under a blanket, like everyone
and
was
he
doing.
was having some trouble with the equipment that we sent him. And so a FaceTime just comes up on my phone. It's Hugh Jackman, and he's in his living room in the middle of COVID, and he's got a blanket over his head, and he's like, help me figure this out. And that was my introduction to Hugh Jackman under a blanket, recording the Hugh Jackman penis, which that for me, it was one of the great FaceTimes of my life. And then he had such a good time that he came and joined the ensemble of our spinoff, Human Resources, and he was regular on that.
I mean, we've had the most incredible group of actors join us. I mean, we always can't believe it. And it is true, when we had Holly Hunter this year, it was like, oh my God, this is so incredible. And when Kristen Wiig said she would be the vagina and is Jesse's vagina, she's so incredible.
Helen Mirren was a highlight for us.
Is there anyone who surprised you that, like, you watch Big Mouth? Are you?
Are you who watch Big Mouth?
It's everybody's kid.
Like when Paul Giamatti said, yes, I'll play Andrew's poop growing inside Andrew when he was constipated. And that was a role that was brought to life by Paul Giamatti. Paul said that it was his son's love for the show that inspired him to say yes to this.
Yes.
And we're all the better for it.
It's so funny.
It's the children of great stars that have gotten us
Isabella
where we are.
Rossellini, for our spinoff, she was like, my son thinks this is the coolest thing I've ever done. And so, like, each of those, you really feel like we're very lucky with the children.
This episode is brought to you by AMC and AMC Plus, presenting Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, critically acclaimed with a 98% Rotten Tomatoes score, for your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Drama Series. Episodes available to all Television Academy members at amcnfyc.com. When you pitched John Mulaney on playing you, how did you sell your character? How did you tell him what?
Well, I mean, the journey of Andrew was very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it started off, and I don't think it's a secret. I've
talked about it in front of John and in front of 5,000 people at the Greek Theater.
John, not our first choice. But Zach Woods and Nick did this pencil test together, and Zach is so funny and such a great improviser, and we've used him multiple times on the show, including in season 8. He's the other Andrew.
Yes.
So we did like that meta thing where Nick becomes friends with this other Andrew that threatens their friendship. But originally it was going to be Zach, and HBO.
Yeah, he was doing
Max,
at that point.
I only think of it as Max.
No, it was HBO, because this was back in he was on Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right.
And this was at the moment when Netflix was really at war with HBO, and they were, using comedic actors as pawns in a much larger battle that we were truly not affecting in any way.
And so powerless too. But
Truly. But they were like,
basically,
basically, no, we're not letting Zach out to be a
HBO
voice on the
wouldn't let
show.
him do the show, so we had to figure out a new Andrew, and there was a question, like, because you and John at the time were really in the thick of Oh Hello, and we were kind of wondering, all of us, like, in Oh Hello, like, John's the real alpha, and George is the alpha, and Gil is the beta. Like, can you guys flip that?
I'm coming back to Wayne's World. We're coming back around to the dynamics of Wayne's World.
Yeah, George is Wayne.
Yeah, exactly.
And Gil is Garth.
Yeah.
Like, can it work the other way? And you guys were together, and he was so funny. And ultimately, it was just like, well, John's just the funniest guy around.
And it was like this thing of like, does this? It does. Once I could like wrap my head around, I was like, this does work. And then John, of course, infuses Andrew with like elements that are. He's still very much based on Andrew Goldberg, but John has this sort of like weird old-timey formality that then is infused into Andrew as a character.
He's like an old man in a child's body.
And it's funny, like, even when it wasn't like me when I was a kid, there was never a moment when I was like, no, that's not me, that can't be. It's like, it's funny and it feels real and true to John, so it works.
Yeah.
When you were writing the first season and you were coming up with all this out there stuff, were you just like, they're never going to let us, okay, let's put it down, but this isn't getting on the air? Like,
It's so interesting. What I honestly remember was, again, we were, I believe, the 34th original series on Netflix. So it was incredibly
Wild
early.
West,
It was
yeah.
a bit of the Wild West, and they were, at that moment, establishing themselves as the place where artists could come and make whatever they wanted. The pitch was like, don't worry about advertisers. It's all subscription-based. You don't have to worry about anything. Just go make it. And they, from the jump, they already had BoJack, which was going to be its own risky thing in a sort of emotional space that not a lot of animation had had. But with us, they were like, you're making a very dirty, risky animated show. Go for it.
Yeah.
It really was, they were really from the jump, were like, just go for it. And we did, and they were rewarded for that. And it was, we really were so lucky to enter Netflix at that moment because we could not have made what Big Mouth turned out to be anywhere else successfully. No. We had a couple of other offers, and it really wouldn't have worked the way it did, I don't think, anywhere else.
Yeah, they gave us so much freedom that what happened is we, it might not seem like it, but we policed ourselves. And like, especially because there's 4 of us creators, like there's a continuum. Like I think you and Mark are probably on the prudish side.
I would say, weirdly, I have become the most prude of the group, and I think people would have thought early on and be like, oh, well, Nick's probably the dirtiest one.
And Jen and I tend to be on the other end, where what we always say is, what are we doing here? Are we going for it or not?
Yeah.
Like, are we cowards?
Well, that was when the show finally came out, we had actually done about 2 seasons of the show by the time it actually premiered. Animation takes so long to make. In a good way, we were able to kind of create the show in a bubble without kind of a feedback loop.
Right.
But when the show finally did come out, there was one review that said, like, Big Mouth gives 0 fucks. And we really tried to take that as our ethos. And Jen, I really feel like Jen was always the one who's like, no, Big Mouth gives 0 fucks. And we really tried to follow that through in going the distance on certain bits.
but it while being the limits of profane and bawdiness, there was always an emotional honesty. It never felt like it was just exploitative or like you were just going for shock humor. There was an emotional story and truth to every place it went, I think.
That's true, and I think it's this funny thing as we are now like talking about it as coming to the end of 8 seasons. I don't know if this is going to be helpful or interesting, but it's this funny feeling when we do press and talk about the show. You know, it is so dirty when you see it. It became sort of the brand of like, oh my God, this show is shockingly dirty. But what we know and what the people who watch the show and what a number of people who write about the show know is that it is very emotionally driven. The dirty stuff only works if it has equal measure of emotional honesty. And the emotional honesty only works if it's simultaneously dirty and going for it.
Right. It would be too sweet without.
It would be
the
too
hard jokes,
saccharine or
yeah.
sweet, or it would be too dirty without any like pointlessly and needlessly dirty. And so there's this, like, I feel like in interviews we're constantly like, I swear to God, we're really trying. I swear to God, we love these people and we're trying to do so much. And I think the people who actually ended up watching the show understand that. And I think the people who saw like a kid masturbating was like, well, this is a dirty show. And it's like, well, I think it's more than that. Which is all to say, give us a fucking Peabody.
Absolutely. I endorse.
Thank you.
But I think along those lines, it all comes back to the Shame Wizard. Like, to me, the Shame Wizard was so informative because there is that thing that, like, yeah, some people see a kid masturbating and they're like, this is not for me. But guess what? Kids masturbate. So do adults. Like, and the fact that we don't talk about it suggests that it's shameful.
Yeah.
And that is one of our missions that we realized over time, especially after doing that shame arc in season 2, because when you talk about something that's shameful, you realize that other people are having that same experience, and it becomes less shameful.
Yes.
Have you heard from, since you've been doing this, parents and others who are like, I was able to speak about these issues with my...
All the time.
Yeah.
It is weirdly, one of the most gratifying things is for parents to be like, I watched this with my kids, or I made my kids watch this. Yeah. We're now entering this period. It was really helpful for me to watch, or kids in school being like, I watched this. It's better than the sex ed, unfortunately. That
Well, we did this thing, the second to last episode of the show is we actually opened it up on the Big Mouth Instagram channel. We said, hey fans, is there anything you want to know about growing up or puberty that we haven't covered yet? And we got like within hours, thousands of replies. And then in the show, there's this moment where Maury and Connie are hosting it, and Connie says something about how like lots of people say Big Mouth is like the sex ed they never had, and Maury says
That's very sad.
well, that's like very gratifying, but also very sad.
Very gratifying and also very sad.
Which like really sums it up to me. It's like, oh, that's great, but like, come on, can't we do better for kids?
So, and literally then I've had a few people be like, we have seen this in our school has shown us X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's very gratifying.
Speaking of Maury, coming up with Maury and Connie, tell me the evolution of those characters.
Maury starts really because, as Andrew, why don't you tell it?
Well, I remember very vividly, I was weirdly in my son's room talking to you on the phone, and as soon as I said the words hormone monster, Nick said,
Touch yourself, Andrew.
I was like, yes, that's the guy, that's the voice, that's what he said, and I did.
Both in his son's room and in the show.
It's a response.
And
His son wasn't in the room, to be clear.
Yeah, so it's cool.
Yeah, no.
could you picture me that this monster is terrifying but also nurturing?
Well, we had the voice, and then as we developed the character designs.
So Joe Vox is still director at Family Guy, which is where I worked before this, and we were good friends, and Joe was drawing the original characters for us, and he heard the voice you were doing. And that design for Maury, like the first version he did is very, very close to what it is.
Yeah, it's sort of pan, in that sort of
goatee
pan thing, and the horn and everything. But Maury did like the early, even in the pencil stuff, he's like a little, there's like a slight like evil to him that's the one thing that sort of got softened a little bit in his actual design and in the actual acting.
Well, and even over the years, to me, it's still like the Maury and Andrew relationship is so interesting, because like at the beginning, it was very much like Maury is like, do this, do that, do this. And Andrew's like, why are you torturing me? And then by the end, Maury's like, dude, you're a little fucked up kid.
So the evolution of a man integrating his hormone monster and then overcoming it.
When parents come up to you and say, is this okay for my 9-year-old or 11-year-old to watch?
Well, you always say, there are a few things we say. You need to have watched it first. We believe the show is okay for people who are going through puberty or who have gone through puberty. But a parent might disagree. And for some kids, they're not ready for it. My niece and nephew, who are 15 now, they've only started just watching it because that's where they were at it. You got to be ready for it on a certain level. I always say, please watch the first 2 so that you can sense. It's both for boys and girls that we do the whole thing. And I tend to think that it's a great thing when your kid is going through puberty, and the thing we really hear from parents is it's great to talk about afterwards. You might not necessarily, some kids do not like to watch it with their parents, and that is so fair. But afterwards, they have really good conversations. I think back on our first season with the head push. That was really the beginning of us talking about consent and how that works. And I think that really created a lot of good conversations, but all of it.
Yeah, I mean, you deal with like lineup of issues that like would be a ABC after school special, but in a way that is like really, incredibly fun and palatable, but while being often through metaphor, very authentic and realistic to them.
I will say it's completely changed the way we talked with our kids about sex. Like I will say, I never would have talked with my daughter about masturbation. Wouldn't have crossed my mind in a way. And it was really through the show that I really, realized I should be. Talking about like women's pleasure was not something I would have even thought about. That we had read this book by Peggy Orenstein called Girls and Sex. Totally changed the way we as a family and we as a writer's room talked about it too,
We learned so much about the world, about human development, about
how to be a good person.
How to be a good person, all the things that the culture was going through and that kids go through, whether it's related to gender or sex or mental health, all of that. We talk to a lot of high school students every year. There's an educator named Shafia Zaloom up in the Bay Area, and she would talk to us about what her students were going through, and then we'd sit with her students every year and say, what do you want to see? What are you experiencing? And that would inspire some great episodes.
How did the show get to a place when you started writing that? You're writing a show about young people in junior high school who are talking to the ghost of Duke Ellington, who lives in the attic. That's not a place you typically see a young adult show.
No.
The Duke Ellington?
Duke,
that came from a lie we told.
That was from a lie that we told, which was what we told them. What we told Netflix in the pitch was like, we got Nick, we got Andrew, we got Jesse, we got Jay, and we got the ghost of Duke Ellington, because we had told them that I had lived in a house
where he died,
that he had died in.
But it was like that.
The truth is that I had visited a house at one point that had at one point belonged to Nat King Cole. And in that house, there was a room that had wallpaper that was Nat King Cole's sheet music that had been, and it really stuck in my head as this really beautiful visual. And it was sort of like when we were coming up with, but this show's animated, what makes this show animated? And we were like, like maybe there's this like ghost that lives in Nick's house. And then we told the great lie that it was Duke Ellington. And I grew up a massive jazz fan, so it is true in that way. And Duke Ellington felt like this very funny character who in real life was a very sort of debonair man who's not like a
psychopath.
As we.
That said, Jordan, the voice that he does is actually, Jordan Peele definitely listened to old audio
of Duke Ellington.
Of course. Because it's in there.
We are, by the way, Jordan Peele, Oscar-winning director,
we discovered
writer.
him.
We're like his only acting gig.
Yeah.
Wow. We're kind of the last acting gig that Jordan Peele took.
Were there moments in the writer's room where you're just like, somebody's going to come in and arrest us any second here? Like, we can't do this.
It's like anything with the show. You know what it is and you don't know what it is when you start. And so you're all discovering it together. And there was that interesting thing also of like, you're making a show about kids for adults. Is that for anybody? Right? I think John Mulaney in the writer's room even asked that question. And it was really like, I hope we're making a show for someone. And I remember the night before the show came out, Mark was like, have we made a show that no one will watch? And then it was so gratifying.
I mean, the references are, from Duke Ellington's Ghost to are so wide and varied, and it's very personal, but very grounded in these characters.
Yeah, really. I mean, to be able to understand what the emotional truth is of any episode is key for us. And being so kind of emotionally honest gives us a license to push the envelope and be gross or graphic or things like that. And both balance each other. And that balance was one of the delightful keys to the whole show.
We didn't realize how emotional the show would be initially. And so we would find when we were writing that first season, if you didn't have an emotional core, the episode didn't work. And that was sort of a surprise to us. And so that really led us through of you really need to find that.
You thought it could be just sort of satiric.
Or maybe I think that we thought it was more funny than emotional. And then it was like, of course, it's a time of big emotions. That's actually the biggest thing.
I would posit that it's the most realistic depiction of what young people go through at these periods that's been put out there. I can't think of another one that dives into it does it in metaphor and.
Yeah, but to be able to outwardly dramatize all these complex things that are happening to the body, shame and anxiety. Anxiety was our fourth season. We focused on that, and Maria Bamford lent her voice to the anxiety mosquito. And being able to outwardly manifest these creatures and these monsters is just one of the most powerful elements of the show.
And the depression kitty.
Yeah.
Because I will say, it's so funny. Shame definitely came first. Andrew totally was like, who is Maury's mortal enemy? The shame wizard, right? So he came first. Then came anxiety. But depression kitty is the one people talk to me the most about. That really gave me a voice of what was happening. And it really brought me a lot of solace. And I always find that really interesting because I guess she came in season 3 though, right?
She
Yes.
came in it might have
with
been
the
the end, the
department
very end
the
of season 2.
the
Actually,
department.
it was the last episode of season 2, which was the Department of Puberty.
Puberty, yeah, she came in at the end of season 2. And so, but those 3 really led us, I think, as we brought in other creatures as well.
Yeah, it does really describe the process of depression taking hold of you and how, especially as a young person, that affects you.
Yeah, and the kind of weight and comfort that depression can trap you in, the idea that let's just lay down and drink melted ice cream and, how pleasant that can be.
So were there any moments writing where you're like, were there any things where you said, okay, this is too much?
Do we ever say that? Yeah, sure. A couple times.
There was one thing with Garrison Keillor's head where I said, that's too much.
It's
and
funny
they
because,
all were laughing. Oh, we found Jen's line.
Well, what you have in season 1 is we did a bit with Garrison Keillor, and Maury had sex with the decapitated head of Garrison Keillor, and that made it into the show, and Netflix was fine with it. We never heard anything about that. There was one step beyond that we had pitched in the writer's room that never made it even to the record, that I don't think Netflix even heard. And that's where like, let's not go all the way there. But it's
Can you describe what that was?
I think it had to do with the decapitated head eating Maury's ass or something like that.
That's what it was.
Okay, yeah. So
I said, that is too much. And then every time I left the room, they'd all giggle and say, like, let's put it back in.
Yeah,
I swear they did that on 2.5 Men one episode.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yeah, I'm sure they beat us to that. But for the most part, we were just using whatever made us laugh in the room, and we tried and we played with. And then the actors in the booth would have the freedom to improv too. So we would take these scripts that we thought were great, and we would let our actors, especially before COVID, when everyone could be in the booth together, they would open up the scenes, play with it. And we got so much realness and comedy from that, putting Nick and John together, or Nick and Maya, or Jason Mantzoukas is a great improv guy. And getting them to bring those talents into the show was one of the other kind of magic ingredients of
secret
the whole thing.
Sauce.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Casting and staffing the show, was there some sort of test to see if these people were going to be able to go there?
Sure.
Yes.
There was. When we interviewed writers at the beginning, because even in the pilot, it was pretty frank and confessional about, Nick feeling insecure because he didn't have pubic hair, and Andrew having this need to masturbate all the time. So we'd engage with writers about their stories of mortification, masturbation, whatever it was. And those people who could talk about it comfortably or just share something that's a little bit revealing, we knew that they would be probably a better fit. And then when we talked to women, I think it was like menstruation stories that the topic turned to that. And that was another opportunity to learn like who might just feel comfortable at the table. Because we want everyone to feel safe and comfortable, and like it was a place everyone could share their stories and bring their horror stories.
I don't think I would have made it to the second round of interviews.
Yeah, no, that's true. And maybe, yeah. Well, we got lucky. We've some writers were on for all 8 seasons, which is amazing. There are 5 writers who have been with us pretty much the entire time. And, to have the opportunity, especially in these days, to go 8 seasons and to have the kind of continuity that we've had is pretty amazing.
You took these characters in so many places. Is there anything left on the table for the reunion or
We've left enough for when we decide to reboot the show.
No.
What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think so. I think, like, one thing, like, none of our kids have lost their virginity. Like, and that's, like, in terms of, like, a story we haven't really, like, we told the story of Leah losing her virginity, but, I think, like, after they've aged up a few more years, like, to tell the story of our kids having sex for the first time is a very big mouth story.
Yeah. What was beautiful about the show, the idea of it being about adolescence and puberty, is that it's about change. And the Charles Bradley song's changes. It's like these kids evolved and literally, physically, and emotionally change. So even by the end of season 8, it didn't feel like we were repeating ourselves. It felt like there are just more stories to tell because these things keep happening to them that are part of the evolution of a life lived. And so it felt like we had, in a great way, we got to season 8 and we're like, boy, we still feel like we have new stories to tell. And that was exciting, but also felt like a comfortable place to say goodbye for now.
Do you have a favorite episode?
They're all our favorite. But there's an episode, the second to last episode of the whole series, I love. And every time I watch it, it's really where we answer all the unanswered questions about puberty that we never got to. And I think that one is really great. But I also think about like Girls Are Horny Too. I love that episode. That's in the first season. What do you got?
We did a musical episode about Disclosure, the musical.
That's great.
Which honestly was it was so well done. Our songwriter Mark Rivers,
great.
He's so talented and brought so much to the show. He wrote some amazing songs for that, but also it's really nuanced about a lot of issues about, boy-girl dynamics, and there's some teacher getting canceled in that appropriately, I might add. Anyway, there are so many. I think of the one where we went into the future in 2052 with Nick Starr in the future. Some of these form breakers where we, each season do an episode where we kind of push the envelope or just change up the way we tell stories. Those are some of my favorites because they're so unique.
And how do you feel about where you're leaving these characters? Do you feel like they can
Yes.
get a little choked
Yes,
up? But,
we do. We feel like they can... we feel really good about where we leave them, where they're going. It's bittersweet, but it's good to leave wanting more.
We thought one of the great challenges of the last season, knowing it was the final season, was how do you tell the story of an ending for characters who are just beginning their lives? And that question was the one that our writers' room wrestled with, and I think you did a great job tackling in the last season. But it is, a very odd thing to do an ending when the kids are just, 15 and stepping forward into their lives.
crazy question to ask before the ending has aired, but will we see a reunion?
I hope so. I really do. I think it will be nice to step away. And it would be really nice to come back to them. And that's one of the great things about having 40-year-olds voice 13-year-olds. They can stay that age, or 15-year-olds, or however. It's a very rare thing. Our show is an animated show where the kids grow older.
Yeah.
So it was always different. It was never meant to run forever. But I do think that it will be great to catch up with them someday and see how they're exactly what we thought they'd be like and how they're different. Just the way when you see people 4 years later, they seem different, but they seem the same.
Yeah. Thank you both. This is
pleasure.
thank you for talking to me, and thank you for the show.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you.
It's an extraordinary show, and I think it's going to go down in the annals forever. So.
Well, we hope 13-year-olds find it for many years to come.
I don't think it's going to be topped anytime soon. So thank you both.
Thank you.
So there it is, the fabulous, amazing, unbelievable journey of Big Mouth. I am so sorry that it comes to an end, and I hope they'll bring it together sometime again soon so we can see what happened to these characters as they got through high school. I'd love to meet them on the other side of that journey. Thank you to guests Jennifer Flackett and Mark Levin, to Nick Kroll and Andrew Goldberg. It was a thrill to talk to them about a show that I love so much. And thank you all for listening. Come back next week for another amazing Hollywood story.